Between 1936 and 1945, in a quiet corner of Japanese-occupied China, the Imperial Japanese Army built a facility disguised with an almost boring name, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. It sounded like a public health office. It was actually one of the most disturbing human experimentation programs in modern history. The man in charge was a microbiologist named Shiro Ishii. He believed Japan needed biological weapons to compete on the world stage, and he convinced military leadership to give him a remote facility, a massive budget, and almost no oversight. The facility could hold around 600 prisoners at a time. Most of them were Chinese civilians and soldiers. Others were Korean, Russian, and Mongolian. A small number were even American prisoners of war. There was no official record of a single prisoner ever walking out alive. Inside, doctors infected prisoners with diseases like plague, cholera, anthrax, and typhus, just to study how the human body broke down. Some prisoners were deliberately frozen to study frostbite, then thawed using different methods to see which caused the most damage. Others were tied to stakes outdoors and used as live targets to test the range of flamethrowers, grenades, and explosive shells. Doctors performed surgeries on fully conscious prisoners without anesthesia to study living organs in real time. This was called vivisection, and it was carried out so routinely that staff treated it like an ordinary part of the workday. One former staff member later admitted that performing these procedures eventually felt no different than any other surgical task, despite the patients being alive and aware throughout. Pregnant women were also experimented on to study the effects of disease and trauma on both mother and unborn child. Outside the facility, entire villages were used as field tests. Japanese forces dropped contaminated food, water, and even plague-infested fleas onto populated areas just to measure how effectively disease could spread through a real community. Estimates on the total number of deaths vary widely, partly because most records were destroyed at the end of the war. Some historians place direct experimentation deaths in the thousands. When including the field tests on surrounding villages, the number may be as high as 200,000 to 300,000 people. When Japan surrendered in 1945, Ishii ordered the facility destroyed and fled back to Japan with his senior staff. Here's the part most people never learn in school. The United States investigated Unit 731 after the war, but instead of putting its leaders on trial for war crimes, American officials made a deal. In exchange for the unit's research data on biological warfare, the United States granted Ishii and his top scientists immunity from prosecution. Nobody from Unit 731 was ever tried at the war crimes tribunals held for other Japanese leaders. Ishii lived freely in Japan for over a decade after the war and died of cancer in 1959, never once standing trial. Some of his former colleagues went on to hold respected positions in Japanese medicine and government for the rest of their lives. For decades, the Japanese government denied Unit 731 had ever existed. It wasn't until the 1980s that officials publicly acknowledged the program, and even then, formal compensation for victims and their families was repeatedly denied in court. In 2002, a group of survivors and relatives took their case to a Japanese court, asking for a formal apology. The request was denied. Unit 731 remains one of the clearest examples in modern history of a government deciding that scientific data was worth more than justice for the dead. Did you know about Unit 731 before this video? Let me know in the comments.